Imagine having to prove your own child is yours on your own front lawn. Sounds ridiculous. For this mum, it was reality. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft golden hue over the front lawns of Colton Springs, Texas. The quiet hum of a distant lawnmower blended with the occasional chirp of birds perched along power lines. It was the kind of afternoon that begged for nothing more than stillness, just a mother and her child enjoying the breeze. Monique Harris shifted her 2-year-old son, Ethan, onto her hip, bouncing him gently as she stood on the front porch of their modest home. His tiny fingers curled into the fabric of her t-shirt, his head resting against her shoulder as he let out a tired sigh. It was almost nap time, but for now, he was content in her arms. She walked down the steps and into the grass, letting the warmth of the sun kiss her skin as she swayed side to side. Ethan let out a sleepy giggle, his blonde curls bouncing with every movement. Monique smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "You're getting heavy, mister," she teased. "Pretty soon, Mama won't be able to carry you like this." Ethan responded with a sleepy babble, his words still forming, but his love unmistakable. Across the street, a sprinkler whirred to life, sending arcs of water glistening in the sunlight. A few houses down, kids rode their bikes, their laughter carried by the wind. It was the kind of neighborhood where people took their dogs on slow evening walks, where porch lights flickered on just as the sun dipped beyond the horizon. Monique had lived here for almost 3 years now. She knew most of the neighbors, even if some only exchanged polite smiles. There were backyard barbecues in the summer, a pumpkin carving contest in the fall, and a community-wide Christmas lights competition in the winter. But even in a place like this, where families gathered for block parties and dads waved from behind their lawnmowers, Monique knew she was seen differently. She had felt the stares before. At the grocery store, at the pediatrician's office, in the park. The quick glances at Ethan, then at her, followed by that moment of hesitation before the inevitable. "Oh, is he yours?" She never let it show, never let it steal moments like these. She was raising her son with love, and that was all that mattered. As she stood in the grass, rocking Ethan gently, she let out a content sigh. For now, it was just her and her baby boy, wrapped in a bubble of warmth and quiet love. But across the street, someone was watching. From the front window of her house, Linda Whitaker pulled back the curtain just enough to see without being noticed. She wasn't spying, at least not in the way she'd accused someone else of spying. She was observing. Her eyes settled on Monique, and the little boy nestled in her arms. Linda had seen them before. Quick glimpses, nothing more. She had moved to this neighborhood 6 months ago, and while she had made small talk with a few families, she had never spoken to Monique. But something didn't sit right. She didn't even realize she was gripping the edge of the curtain until her fingers started to ache. The woman outside was black. The child in her arms was not. Linda frowned, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. She had lived long enough to trust her instincts, and something about this scene sent a whisper of doubt through her mind. She wasn't the kind of person who ignored things that looked off. Maybe she's the nanny, she reasoned. Or maybe she's babysitting for a friend. But the way Monique held him, the ease with which she cradled his head, the way Ethan's small fingers curled into her shirt like he had done it 1,000 times before, this wasn't a temporary arrangement. Linda glanced over her shoulder at the kitchen clock. Her husband, Mark, wouldn't be home for another hour. She had time to do something. She let the curtain fall back into place and walked to the foyer, grabbing her phone off the console table. For a moment, she hesitated, chewing on the inside of her cheek. Calling the police was a serious thing. She wasn't someone who made a big deal out of nothing. But what if she was right? What if this child didn't belong to that woman? She pressed the numbers, her thumb hovering over the call button. Then she thought about the news, about the stories of missing children, of mothers pleading into cameras, their voices cracking as they begged for their babies to come home. Her heart tightened. "I don't know if this is an emergency," she said when the dispatcher picked up. Her voice was soft, hesitant, but firm enough to feel justified. "But there's a woman outside my house, holding a child that doesn't look like hers. I don't want to ignore it if something's wrong." The dispatcher asked for more details, and Linda gave them. The address, what Monique looked like, what the child looked like. She insisted she wasn't accusing anyone of anything, just making sure. The call ended. Linda exhaled, rubbing her palms against her jeans as she peeked out the window again. Monique was still there, rocking the child gently, completely unaware that within minutes a police cruiser would be pulling up to the curb. Linda stepped back from the window, the weight of what she had just done settling onto her chest. But she told herself it was the right thing. It had to be. Monique had just started humming softly, a lullaby that Ethan always calmed to, when she noticed something out of the corner of her eye. A black and white police cruiser turned onto the street, moving at a slow, deliberate pace. At first, she didn't think much of it. Maybe they were responding to something a few houses down. But as the car rolled to a stop right in front of her home, her stomach tightened. Ethan stirred in her arms, shifting against her chest, sensing her change in posture. Two officers stepped out. One was a middle-aged white man, tall with a serious face, his uniform crisp and his movements practiced. The other, younger, Latino, seemed a little more hesitant. They both looked at her, then at Ethan. Something in Monique's gut twisted. She adjusted her grip on Ethan, planting her feet firmly in the grass. The older officer, Sergeant Whitman, approached first. He cleared his throat, his gaze flickering from Ethan's fair skin to Monique's dark brown arms. "Ma'am," he said, his voice even, "we received a call about a possible child abduction." For a moment, the words didn't even register. Monique just stared at him, blinking, waiting for him to say something else, something that made sense. "A what?" The younger officer, Officer Ruiz, shifted uncomfortably, his hands resting on his belt. "We were told there's a concern about the child in your care." Ethan let out a small whimper, his grip tightening around Monique's shirt. She instinctively rocked him, patting his back. Her pulse pounded in her ears. "This is my son," she said, her voice sharp but controlled. "Why would anyone think otherwise?" The officers exchanged a glance. Sergeant Whitman exhaled through his nose. "Ma'am, we're just following up on a report. Do you have identification on you?" Monique's jaw clenched. Her ID. She had lived in this neighborhood for years. She had walked this street countless times with Ethan. And now, because someone thought she didn't look like his mother, she had to prove she belonged in her own front yard. Her eyes darted around, and that's when she saw Linda standing on her porch across the street. The woman wasn't hiding, wasn't pretending to mind her own business. She stood stiff, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. Monique felt heat rush to her face. So she was the one who called. She wanted to yell, wanted to demand an explanation, but right now she had to stay focused. She took a slow breath, keeping her voice level. "My ID is inside, but I don't see why I should have to show it just because someone doesn't believe he's mine." Whitman's expression didn't change. "We just need to clear this up, ma'am." Monique's hands tightened around Ethan's small body. She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell them they had no right. But she knew how this worked. She had seen the news. She had seen what happened to people who got too loud, too upset, too defiant, when they were just trying to live their lives. So she swallowed the fire burning in her chest. "My purse is inside. I need to put him down first." Whitman gave a stiff nod. "That's fine. We'll wait here." Monique turned, walking toward the front door. She refused to rush, refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her panic. She stepped inside, her hands shaking as she set Ethan down on the couch. He looked up at her with wide, confused eyes. She forced a smile. It's okay, baby. Mama just needs to get something real quick. She grabbed her purse off the counter, fingers fumbling as she pulled out her ID and phone. When she stepped back outside, she held both in front of her like a shield. "My name is Monique Harris," she said, her voice firm. "This is my address. And this is my son." She pulled up her phone, tapping into her photo albums. A dozen pictures filled the screen. Ethan at the hospital the day she adopted him. Ethan's first birthday. Ethan asleep in her arms, tiny fingers clutching hers. She turned the screen toward them. Officer Ruiz leaned in first. His eyes softened. Whitman took a little longer, his lips pressing into a thin line. Monique folded her arms. "Do you need more proof?" Whitman sighed through his nose, rubbing a hand down his face. "That won't be necessary, ma'am." But the damage was already done. For a long moment, no one spoke. Ethan, sensing the shift in the air, wiggled off the couch and ran to Monique, wrapping his tiny arms around her leg. She reached down, smoothing a hand over his curls, grounding herself in his warmth. Sergeant Whitman sighed, adjusting his belt. "Looks like everything checks out." Monique scoffed, shaking her head. Checks out. Like she had just passed some kind of test. Like she had to prove she was allowed to love her own child. She turned toward Linda, still standing stiffly on her porch, arms crossed like she was waiting for an apology. Monique felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. "I'd love to know," she said, directing her voice loud enough for Linda to hear. "What exactly made you think my son was in danger?" Linda flinched slightly, but she held her ground. I wasn't sure. I just thought..." Monique let out a sharp breath, tilting her head. "You thought what?" Linda's mouth opened, then closed. She swallowed. "I was just trying to look out for him." Monique shook her head, her pulse still thudding in her ears. "No, you weren't looking out for him. You were looking out for your own comfort." Linda's jaw tightened, her face turning red. She glanced at the officers, as if hoping they'd back her up, but neither of them spoke. Monique stepped forward, keeping her voice steady, controlled. "You saw a black woman with a white child, and instead of minding your damn business, you assumed something had to be wrong. You didn't ask me. You didn't introduce yourself. You called the cops like I was a threat." Linda exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "I wasn't trying to accuse you of anything." Monique let out a humorless laugh. "But you did." She gestured toward the officers. "And now, these men are standing in my yard, in front of my child, treating me like a suspect in my own neighborhood. All because you couldn't imagine a world where he could be mine." Linda looked away, shifting uncomfortably. Officer Ruiz, still standing by the patrol car, cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said gently, "we do have to follow up on calls like this." Monique turned toward him. "Oh, I get that. I bet you'll do this all the time when white mums take their black kids outside, right?" Ruiz lowered his gaze, his lips pressing together. Whitman, still stiff-faced, muttered, "We were just doing our job." Monique's anger burned in her chest, but it was exhaustion that settled into her bones. She had done this before. She had lived this script in a dozen different ways, at stores, at playgrounds, at restaurants where strangers felt entitled to question her motherhood. It never got easier. She turned back to Linda, whose face was tight with embarrassment, maybe even guilt. "Next time you're unsure," Monique said, her voice quieter now, "you could just walk over and introduce yourself, instead of calling the cops on a mother and her baby." Linda's lips parted like she wanted to respond, but no words came. The officers gave a half-hearted nod, then walked back toward their cruiser. As they pulled away from the curb, Monique let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Ethan tugged at her jeans, looking up at her with big, curious eyes. "Mama?" She bent down, picking him up and kissing his cheek. "I'm okay, baby," she murmured. "We're okay." But as she turned back toward the house, she knew things would never feel quite the same. Monique closed the front door behind her and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. She could still feel the weight of their stares, the way her heart had pounded the moment the police car pulled up. Ethan wiggled in her arms, so she set him down, watching as he toddled over to his toy basket in the living room. He had no idea what had just happened, no idea that his mother had to prove she was his mother. She rubbed her hands over her face, forcing herself to take deep, steady breaths. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Angela, her best friend. "Hey girl, just saw some cops outside your house. Everything okay?" Monique stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back, "I'll call you later." She didn't want to explain it. Not right now. Not while her hands were still shaking. Through the window, she saw Linda still standing on her porch, shifting from foot to foot, like she wasn't sure whether to go inside or come over. Monique turned away. She walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and grabbed Ethan's juice cup. Something, anything to give her hands a reason to move, to ground herself. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. She already knew who it was. Monique inhaled deeply before walking over and pulling it open. Linda stood there, arms folded, shifting awkwardly on the porch. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Linda cleared her throat. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." Monique stared at her. Linda swallowed. "I shouldn't have called the police." Monique raised an eyebrow. "No, you shouldn't have." Linda's eyes darted toward the ground. "I thought I was doing the right thing." Monique crossed her arms. "The right thing for who?" Silence. Linda exhaled, rubbing her hands together. I guess I didn't think." Monique tilted her head. "No, you did think. You thought that a black woman with a white child didn't look right to you. And instead of asking questions, you made a decision that could have gone really bad for me." Linda looked up, guilt flickering across her face. Monique let out a slow breath. "You could have walked over and introduced yourself. You could have minded your business, but you didn't." Linda nodded, pressing her lips together. "I know, and I'm sorry." Monique studied her for a moment. She wasn't sure if she believed the apology, or maybe she just didn't care if it was sincere. She glanced back at Ethan, still playing on the floor, completely unaware of the weight of this conversation. She turned back to Linda. "I hope next time you do think." Linda nodded. And then, without another word, Monique closed the door. She didn't owe her anything more than that. Monique stood by the door for a long moment after shutting it. She could hear Linda's hesitant footsteps retreating down the porch steps, back to her side of the street. Ethan babbled to himself as he stacked his blocks, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just passed. Monique let out a breath and walked over, sinking onto the floor beside him. She ran a gentle hand over his soft curls, watching as he focused, his tiny fingers clumsily fitting one block onto another. This was her son, her baby. And yet today had been a reminder, one she had been given far too many times, that some people would always look at them and see something that didn't fit. That no matter how much love she poured into him, no matter how many bedtime stories, scraped knees kissed, or sleepless nights spent soothing his cries, someone would always question whether she belonged in his life. And one day, Ethan would be old enough to notice it too. She hated that. She hated that there would come a day when she'd have to explain why the world sometimes saw them as a puzzle that didn't match. She reached for one of his blocks, placing it carefully on top of his tower. He clapped, his face lighting up. Monique smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She wasn't going to let today take anything away from them. But she'd remember. She'd remember the way those officers had looked at her. The way Linda had hesitated. The way she had to pull out proof of her motherhood, like she was being questioned at some border she never agreed to cross. And she'd remember the lesson. People like Linda would always exist. But the next time someone like her got that suspicious itch, she'd have to think twice. Because today, Linda had learned something too. She had learned that her fears didn't make someone else guilty. That her discomfort wasn't an excuse for Monique's humiliation. Monique kissed the top of Ethan's head, and that at least was something. Because one lesson at a time, the world had to learn. How many times do we see something unfamiliar and assume the worst? How often do we let bias guide our actions without even realizing it? Before making a call, before passing judgment, before letting suspicion replace common sense, pause. Think. Question yourself. Because someone's life, someone's dignity, and someone's peace should never be collateral damage for your assumptions.